One of the things I wanted to do for July was to bring a series on the mission and vision of Banbury Community Church. There were lots and lots of things that I liked about the church when I was considering coming here as the pastor, and the vision statement was very much one of those. It's simple, it's got 3 parts to it. Love God, reach people, make disciples. It kind of rolls off the tongue, and it's just a very memorable and easy to get your head round mission statement. I really like it. You might ask yourself, why have a mission statement? And I've seen some mission statements in churches and in other organizations that are truly shocking. They run on for pages. They're too long, you can't remember them. If you can't say a mission statement and remember it, it's kind of, you've lost it, haven't you? So it needs to be short and punchy. But why have one at all? Well, a vision statement brings direction to an organization. It shows what that organization is all about. Hopefully it would bring inspiration, that you would see it and go, yes, I can get behind that. Hopefully it would be unifying. It would pull people together. Everybody would be on board. It helps you prioritize. It says, okay, we're about this, but we're not about that. It's got purpose embedded in it. A good vision statement should have some purpose behind it. And it should define some boundaries, some of the things we're not going to do, but some of the things we are going to do. So I think a mission statement is great. And so we're going to start today with Love God, which is the first part of our church mission statement. Love God. And we're going to look a little bit at what that means. Next Sunday, which is the 12th of July, which we're going to have the picnic. Rosie's very kindly offered a bit of her farm for us to go and have a picnic at in the afternoon. But we're going to be, in the morning, we're going to be looking at the second part of our mission statement, which is reach people, and trying to understand what that is. The third part of the series will be actually on the final Sunday in July, because we're going to take a little break, which I'll explain in a minute. But the final part of the series will be called Make Disciples. And that will be, as I say, final weekend of July. But in between, on the 19th of July, I've invited a couple of friends of ours, Paul and Karen Cooper. You may remember I actually mentioned Paul and Karen in my very first message that I ever preached here on the Valentine's weekend back in February. Paul and Karen are wonderful people. They pastor a church in Wellingborough, and they've pastored it. They started it in, I think, 2012 or 2013 with just a front room of people. And it's now at 300 plus and 2 services a weekend. And in fact, on Friday, we went to see Karen put on a Christian musical in the local theatre in the town. And I've got to tell you, it was one of the best and most professional Christian productions I've ever seen. And I remember when that woman walked around the corner of the golf club in Letchworth to come on the Alpha course for the first time. And I met her for the first time and she wasn't saved. I remember that day. And you talked about seeds and stuff and people planting seeds. She's gone on such an incredible journey. So Paul's going to preach for us, but we're going to hear from both of them about the journey of their church. Really looking forward to having them with us. So that's a little bit about the Vision series. Now I want you to imagine a scenario. Imagine a scenario, a moment, in which you have to go into hospital to have your tonsils out. Let's say you've had horrible tonsil problems for a while in your life, and you go into hospital and you have your tonsils out and you're there in bed and you're feeling very sore and you can't speak and you can only eat soft white bread and it's all very horrific, you know. So which way would you like to be loved while you're in bed there? And we'll do a quick straw poll. I'm going to ask some questions and you can pop your hands up to each of these. There's 5 ways that you can be loved. Would you be somebody who would like some words of affirmation? In other words, the nurse or your mum or somebody to come along and say, you've got this, you're going to be fine, this is going to be all right, hang in there, encouragement. Put your hand up if you're somebody that likes to be affirmed verbally. So there's a few of us like that. Okay, how about acts of service? You love it when someone comes and tidies up the bit around your bed and, you know, they tuck you in and they're kind of checking that you've got everything you need. Do you like people who do acts of service? Anyone here? Pop your hand up if you like acts of service. I can see as this unfolds, some of you are going to put your hands up to everything. You're going to have to prioritize here, okay? Do you like to receive gifts? Are you a gifts person? Yeah, there's a few quick hands up there. Can I just say on Father's Day, when I got that gift, I should have really opened it at the front. There was a kind of personalized sort of kind of gardening set in there, and then also some sponge cake. And, you know, I was just so made up about that. So thank you to you for organizing that. I am someone that likes gifts a lot. That's great. What about quality time? Anyone like quality time? Yeah, you just want someone to come and spend some time with you. I discovered many years ago, going through this with my wife, that my wife likes quality time, but sleeping beside her doesn't count. I have to be awake. That was a little thing that I learned. And then how about physical touch? Do you like a hug? Do you like, like if you were in the hospital with your tonsils out, would you like someone to come and hold your hand? Okay, so there's 5 kinds of different love. And somebody called Gary Chapman has written a book called The 5 Love Languages. And apparently all of us fall into one of those categories as having that's our top love language. And so when somebody tries to communicate with us in a love language we don't get or don't understand, we're just like a little bit thrown by it. But when they communicate in a love language we really like, then we're very, very happy. So just going back full circle to my tonsils illustration, when I was 6, I had my tonsils out. I bet the nurse that I would survive the anaesthetic awake, and lasted a full 7 seconds before she was correct. And then I woke up with a very, very sore throat, and all by myself, and I was quite upset. My mum wasn't allowed to visit me, but she managed to post a packet of felt tips and a pad through the window. And I still remember that to this day. And I think that's part of I really like gifts. That's how I'm wired. In your YouVersion Bible notes for today, I've put a link to the book by Gary Chapman on Amazon, and I do recommend it. It's a really good read, and if you're someone that wants to work on your key relationships, not just with your spouse, but with the people around you, learn their love languages and communicate in them. It really helps. Now, what I've also done, at the risk of death by PowerPoint today, death by QR code, I've done a graphic for us, which is on a new page of our website called Equipping. Okay, so www.banburycommunitychurch.com/equipping. And there's a few bits and pieces on there. There's a reference to YouVersion, Bible Project. What's that wonderful mini-series about Jesus, Chloe, that you really like? Chosen, yes, thank you. So I've done a few references to there, but I've also put a graphic on there, or a couple of graphics, one for your phone, one for a standard slide of today's message. So you can look at it in detail where you're at, because we're going to go through those, and I just wanted to let you know that that's there. So yeah, let's move swiftly on. Right, so love God. Well, it won't surprise you to know that loving God is the number one instruction that we find in God's word. People often came to sort of see Jesus and sort of say, well, so what's the most important thing I should be doing? What's the most important part of the law? And Jesus would say things to the effect of something like Mark 12, verse 30, which says, love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind, and with all your strength. And we're used to that kind of a position with God. And can I say that if we love other things, they don't treat us very well back in the long run. If there is no wickedness at all in God, actually it makes a lot of logical sense to love who he is. I love him as a person, love him for his character and his attributes, but also love him because he is never going to treat you badly. Some of the other things on offer out there in the world that ask us to love them, in the long run, or perhaps even in the short run, they don't necessarily treat us so well. And I can think of things like money or fame or status or, whatever it might be. There are some other things out there vying for our love attention, but God is very definite and says, no, love me because, I am worthy of your love, but also I will treat you the best back in return. But I want to ask a question, a big question today. Could God himself be somebody who receives love in different ways? Could he be somebody, like we've got love languages for ourselves? I think my top 2 would be touch and then gifts, things like that. Are there some ways in which God receives love himself that he prefers? And I want to suggest to us today that he does. I want to suggest that God receives love from us in 3 major ways. And I'm going to unpack these major ways for us as we go through this morning. Number 1 would be on the mountaintop. Number 2 would be in the day-to-day. And then number 3 would be in moments of personal cost. So mountaintop, day-to-day, moments of personal cost. Now, there could be more. And perhaps you could ponder that this afternoon as you digest your Sunday lunch or next week. Maybe there are other kinds of love that God receives. There could well be. But let's look at these 3, because I think these 3 are very main and major for God. And when we express them and when we're moving in them, God receives love from us. He really does. So let's look at the mountaintop first, and I'm going to pop this up on the slides. Hopefully this will work. Now it's a little bit detailed, but I'm going to take you through all that verbally, so don't worry if you can't see it all, but you can also look at it on your device, hopefully from the download. So mountaintop experiences are those moments of absolutely peak encounter with God. What we see in Isaiah chapter 6 that was read for us by Chris there is that Isaiah has an incredible encounter with the Lord. He has a vision, doesn't he? He sees the Lord high and lifted up, and he sees that the train of his robe fills the whole temple. And then there are these incredible beings, seraphim, that are flying around. Some of them have 6 wings. I mean, I'm struggling to know where they all fit on their body. I mean, that's just incredible, isn't it? And the temple is filled with smoke. It's an absolutely astonishing vision that Isaiah has. It's a peak moment for him in his life. And it actually defines who he is. And he is completely awestruck by the presence of God. That is a mountaintop moment for him in his life. Let's have a quick look at some of the characteristics of what a mountaintop experience is like. It's high intensity. Very high intensity. All of us is fully engaged in it. It's a peak encounter. We would put it up there in some of the defining encounters of our lives. It's like extremely just sort of memorable. It goes into who we are and it kind of sits in our memory. We go back to those times of peak encounter and we say, I remember when. I remember when I was, standing at the top of some waterfalls and God really spoke to me. I remember when I went to that conference and I'd been praying about it for a month and then God hit me like the clappers in the conference and I was knocked out in the spirit. We remember these times. They're highly memorable, aren't they? They often lead on to calling and destiny and purpose. What we find in Isaiah chapter 6 is that it's almost like a fulcrum, but a very uneven one. And it's right at the front end of Isaiah. I always think Isaiah's great value for money. You get 66 chapters in it. But he's got at chapter 6, he gets his vision, doesn't he? And then really the rest of Isaiah is all of the response to the vision. So some of our peak encounters or mountaintop experiences of loving God end up being purpose-defining, destiny-driving occasions for us. The rest of Isaiah is a response to Isaiah chapter 6, if you think about it, isn't it? Think of some of the things in the Bible, not just the Isaiah 6 experience that you might have come across. How about the transfiguration? Those guys got the mountain with Jesus, and then Jesus is in dazzling white, whiter than any laundry could wash his clothes, and he meets with Elijah and Moses. And it's just, and there's a voice from the cloud that says, this is my son, do what he says. And it's like a really, really big deal. And then the disciples are pretty awestruck and frightened. And, that is a mountaintop experience right there. What about Daniel's vision of the Son of Man? Daniel 7, he has a vision of the Son of Man. The Ancient of Days is there, and one like a Son of Man coming on the clouds of heaven. I mean, we're talking peak encounter moments that end up being defining, not just for Daniel, but for the trajectory of the Bible, for the arrival of Jesus. Jesus is the fulfillment of that vision in Daniel 7. What about John on the island of Patmos, breaking rocks at the end of his life, has had a long and fruitful ministry, and an angel appears to him, and he has the vision that leads to the book of Revelation. I mean, man, that's an insane level of encounter. So we're talking some very, very big encounters for people. But what I would say is that they are occasional. They are not every day. And I want to say that there's a challenge in that we can feel that if we're not at that level of intensity, then we're not loving God as much. And I want to just lift that off all of us this morning. Those intense moments, they're essential, they're really incredible, but I think they're unrealistic to live at that level all the time unless you're Elijah. And even he, I think, did some kind of more day-to-day things as well. So a real challenge is, can we not be telling ourselves off that we're not at the peak encounter moments the whole time? Because I don't think it helps. We do still love God, even if we're not at a peak or a mountaintop moment, right? And I think that's really important to remember. I actually think some of us feel like we're backslidden unless we're on the mountaintop. And we're not. We're really not. So release that from yourselves today. There are some other ways that we love God. So let's go on to the second way that I've identified. The second way would be in the day-to-day. In the day-to-day. So this kind of love towards God happens daily. And it can happen all day too. And actually, Jesus taught about this kind of love at the Last Supper. And he had a special word for it. It's called abiding. Anyone here come across the idea of abiding? I'm sure most of us have. Abiding in Christ. And he teaches into it in John 15. Abiding is kind of an old-fashioned Christian-y word for remaining or staying in the Lord. Staying connected to Jesus as often as we can and as often as possible. Now, there are some characteristics to abiding or remaining in Jesus. It's personally very, very intimate. We have Jesus at our right shoulder for as much as possible throughout our day. It's very replenishing. It's very life-giving. We can feel Jesus' life and his sustenance and his input flowing into us. And the description he gives is that it's like we're connected to a vine. And, we are the branches. He's the vine. The life force comes up through the stem and the root and the stem of the vine and then goes into the branches. But if we were cut off from him, and those branches got severed, then there's no life force coming up through us. And actually, that's quite an interesting idea as well, because fruit isn't something we kind of strive for. Imagine a vine striving to produce grapes. What a ridiculous concept that is. Whereas a vine, if it's tended properly and it stays connected, the branches stay connected to the main stem of the plant, it will actually just produce fruit all by itself. So if you're one of those people that thinks, well, where's the fruitfulness in my life? The answer is abide. Remain in Jesus. Keep staying connected with him daily. Fruitfulness comes from remaining connected and not striving. Another characteristic of this kind of loving God, as opposed to the mountaintop type of loving God, is that there are lots of joy moments. Now, I'm not saying you can't have joy in the mountaintop. You'd have profound joy, I'm sure. But that's probably not your top feeling. I think your top feeling is awe and like, wow, God, you're incredible. This is more those joy moments that you get woven into your day. Now, I think there's a challenge with this kind of love too. The challenge for this kind of love is remembering to include Jesus every single day and every single moment of every single day. And if you're a bit like me, I can very quickly forget to do that if I'm mumbling along the M40 or doing some kind of work around the house or just doing my day. It's hard sometimes to remember to include Jesus in our day, but that's what abiding means. It's pausing a moment and asking to be filled with the Spirit. It's pausing a minute and saying, hey, Jesus, what do you think about this? Or it's pausing a moment and saying, hey, Jesus, that was amazing that you provided that for me. I'm so grateful. Thank you for how you've helped me with that. Inviting Jesus into our present moment as often as possible is what abiding is all about. And we have a tendency to forget to do that. There's a superb video that I'm not going to play now, and please don't start playing it in the service if you don't mind, but I'd love you to watch it this afternoon or some point this week, which I've linked in your YouVersion notes, which is all about what it means to abide in Jesus and not striving. It's really good. I found it very encouraging, really encouraging. So I hope that you enjoy it. It's about 13 minutes long, won't take up your day, but it's really good. Done in a kind of cartoon format, but it's pretty deep. So I'd love you to watch that this afternoon. Abiding is choosing to be connected to Jesus every day. So I want to just share a day where that kind of particularly happened for me. I was very intentional about praying that I'd stay close to Jesus. So this was, I think, last Tuesday, and I actively prayed. I said to Jesus, listen, Jesus, I'd love it if we could have lots and lots of joy moments together today. Just pop some things into my routine that would bring me joy. Please, just do whatever you like. I'm open. I'm up for whatever you have. So I do a bit of a walk around my area. I do a 2.5 mile walk quite often. Most mornings I try and put some steps on my step counter, and I'm walking around, and I'm walking down a big busy road in Birmingham. Not all of my walk is on that road, but I go onto it for a bit and then I duck back in and then round the reservoir and back round to my house. And as I was walking along, I drew level with a bus stop, and there were loads and loads of school kids on this bus, and I kind of just paced myself slightly faster so I could get clear of the bus stop before a whole avalanche of kids came out, because I just wanted to not have to struggle with them on the pavement. So I got about 10 yards ahead of this bus, heard the bus stop, heard the doors go open, and then as all these kids came tumbling out ready to go to school. So I'd got about 100 yards to go before the lights, and as I was walking along, this little slip of a girl came walking up alongside me and she said, "Hello, Pastor Nick." And I was completely like, "Oh, hello," like that. And it turned out that she was from the youth department at Birmingham City Church, and she'd recognized me. And it was just a joy moment for me, because there was no way you could plan that. You know, I didn't orchestrate that in any way, shape or form. I didn't prompt her to say it or to recognize me, or the only bit I tried to do was avoid it, if anything, to get ahead of the crowd. And yet somehow the Lord just brought her alongside me. That was just a little mini joy moment. Okay, great, could be a coincidence, but I don't think it was. And then as I was finishing my walk, I went round the reservoir, and I just noticed that the reservoir has an awful lot of really unusual and strange flowers at this time of year. And I was like quite struck by that. And I took a whole bunch of photographs of them and put them on my phone and showed the family and stuff. And I also discovered, little tip for you, if you slide up on a photograph of a plant, if you've got an iPhone, it'll tell you what it is. I didn't know that. I was like, wow, that's cool. I just sort of discovered that by accident. And then I found there was all sorts of strange plants on there, like common kidney vetch. You ever heard of that? I'm like, wow, you know, some of these old Anglo-Saxon names, they beg a belief, don't they? So I was kind of like, wow, that's cool. Thank you, Lord. That's great, you know. And then I think one of the best ones was, it was a funny thing. So I work for Isaiah 61 movement. I'm on their team. That's kind of my other job. So I do half Banbury Community Church and half Isaiah 61 movement. And on Tuesday evening, we had a Google Meet with a person that I would describe kindly as the most opposed to the way we do evangelism through Isaiah 61 movement that I have ever seen. And this would be, we go out and we give out tracts, and I hate doing it, but God's told me to do it, and nobody responds, and our church is only about 30 strong, and it's been 30 strong for a long time. And I'm going to keep that completely at that point and not elaborate any further, just in case they watch that one day, but I don't think they will. But I found it funny. We got 20 minutes into this conversation, and I realized it's supposed to be with a pastor, supposed to encourage them to do relational outreach, and I could tell this was not working. And so we brought it to a close really quickly. But afterwards, the team, we did have a bit of a chuckle. It was like, this is just not the right person. But it was funny, and I feel like the Holy Spirit was having a little bit of a chuckle with me. That's maybe just me. But hey, I found it fun. And so there was a follow-up to this. I asked the gentleman for his pastor's name, and he gave me his pastor's name, and I've actually connected with the pastor, and the pastor has a vision to do a bit more relational evangelism. So all is not lost. I'm quite pleased about that. So that's all kind of worked itself out. But that's a day in which I prayed for moments of joy, moments of connection, of abiding in the Lord. So mountaintop is one way of loving God. Abiding day to day is another. The next one is that we love the Lord in moments of personal cost. We love the Lord in moments of personal cost. And these only happen occasionally, but they are very important to God. What I'm talking about here are things where we have to make a decision to do a hard thing that's the right thing, but it's going to cost us. And what Chris read for us from Daniel chapter 6 was exactly that. The administration in Daniel's kingdom at that time had decided, well, everybody needs to pray to this particular God that's been manufactured, not the one true God. And Daniel, kind of quite understatedly in this chapter, it seems to me, just goes, I'm not doing that. I'm still praying to the one true God. And thereby he invokes a personal cost, doesn't he? It costs him to do that. And in fact, that cost leads to the lion's den. Daniel and the lion's den, very famous story. And so this kind of love is a love that is born in moments of personal sacrifice or personal cost. Now, they only happen occasionally, but they're very important to God. They refine our faith like gold. Apparently, when metallurgists refine gold, they heat it up to an incredible temperature, and then all the dross floats to the surface, and they skim that off, and then you're left with just pure gold. But that's a real pressure and heat environment. Not a pleasant environment to be in, and I'm sure many of us in this room have been in those times with the Lord where we feel like we're being refined And there are some decisions that we have to make, or things that we have to see through, that God is asking us to see through, but we'd really rather not because they hurt, or they're difficult, or they cost us in some way. I'm very struck in the book of Acts when Stephen does his incredible speech to the Sanhedrin, and they get more and more annoyed with him, and then eventually they stone him. I think that's the only time in the New Testament, in fact, I think it's the only time in the Bible where Jesus stands in heaven. He looks up to heaven and Jesus is standing. And what you see in the rest of the scripture is lots of accounts of Jesus seated at the right hand of God. But when the first martyr made the call that I am saying what needs to be said to this group of stiff-necked people, come what may, he took on a personal cost and Jesus stood to his feet. I find that staggering and very inspirational. But God received love in that moment, didn't he? And it was a cost moment. So sometimes one of God's love languages is that he receives love from us in those moments of personal cost, in the personal sacrifice. And what those moments do, provided we're not martyred, is they build perseverance. They build integrity. They forge righteousness down on the inside of us. I don't know if you know anything about how they put up high-rise buildings, but one of the things they do is they marry up concrete with tensile steel. And so they put steel under incredible tensile strength, and then they mold concrete around it. And that's why buildings don't collapse so easily, because concrete can be knocked down quite easily without that. But if it's got the high tensile steel down the inside, it's really, really strong. It combines the best of both. Our faith gets made like that in times when we choose to love God from a place of righteousness and a place of saying, no, I'm not going to do this. I'm going to stick with the way of the Lord. Now, the challenge with this kind of way of loving God is that we have to do some very hard things sometimes. They really cost us hard things that are right to do. We have to maybe tell the truth. Maybe we have to go against the crowd. Maybe we have to speak up for justice. Maybe we have to refuse to be drawn into that gossip group that doesn't say the kindest thing always about the people around us. What we see from Scripture is that Daniel still decides to pray, and he's uncompromising. That's something he's not going to shift on. And then the ridiculous apparatus of that kingdom consigns him into the lion's den. But the lions, they have their mouths shut by God, don't they? God sees that and he honors the righteousness of Daniel. And that's very impressive to me. So what are some key actions we can take? Well, we can see that down the right-hand side there, and hopefully you can see it better on your screen. The key actions are that there are three ways that we can respond to these three different kinds of love languages that God receives. On the mountaintop, really it's surrender to God. It's a worship response. You know, Isaiah just goes, oh, woe is me, I'm a man of unclean lips. What do you want to do with me, God? His heart is open to what God would have him do. That's a surrender moment. And so mountaintop or peak experience kinds of love for God we would probably most closely align that with peak experience in worship, I would suggest. And so surrender is the response there. In the second one, I think it's intimacy. It's include Jesus in everything. Include him in our day-to-day. Ask him for joy moments. Include him in your lunch break. Take him on your walks with you. Ask him about your family situation. Talk to him while you're doing the washing up or loading the dishwasher. If you don't do that, Jesus is kind of limited in how many joy moments he can put in your life, and your intimacy is restricted a bit. I would really encourage you to do that. I'm in a bit of a new season of that at the moment, of just telling Jesus everything. He's really bored of what I'm saying, I'm sure, but we're having a great time. Include Jesus in everything, and your intimacy with him will grow. And I actually think that's one of the areas we're kind of maybe the most deficient in. And then the third thing is to do with decisions. Decide the right course of action. And that leads to an obedience. So worship, intimacy, and obedience are the outcomes from this. Now, I've got some observations just to take us to the next level here. 3 observations to make. God receives all 3 of these styles of loving him equally validly. There's no one way of loving God more that he receives better than another. I actually think he loves all 3. I think these are all great for him. He really enjoys it. You know, he sets up the mountaintop experiences for us often to have those incredible encounters. He loves it when we speak to his son throughout our day. He's rooting for us to make right decisions in those hard moments and to become a righteous person. So I would say he receives all three as loving him. I would also suggest, secondly, that we can't love him in those three ways all at once. I think that's really hard. You might want to disagree with me on that, but I think that's really difficult. If you're having one might lead to another, I get that, but I think it's really hard to do all three altogether. I think they tend to be sequential, or they tend to be in parcels or segments of our life. So let yourself off the hook about the one that you're not in. Just let yourself off the hook about that, because you might well be in the other one. Now, if you're in none of them, what I would suggest, which confession sometimes happens to me, gravitate yourself to number 2, the second one. So if you're not in any of these, focus on the second one in the day-to-day. You can always do that. And we should always be practicing that. Invite Jesus into the moment is the way to deal with that. Now, the third observation I've got is that Jesus teaches the second one, abide, while facing the last one the next day in his life at the Last Supper. And that really struck me when I was researching this message. I was thinking, okay, so we've got sequences here and parceling out and different points for us. Did Jesus have different points as well? And I think he did. And I'm so impressed by a person who can teach, well, rest in me and wait in me and abide in me and connect with me daily, literally hours before going into the most incredible personal cost moment that anyone could ever envisage. You see, it'd be very tempting for Jesus to kind of go, well, build the kingdom, or let's form a band of soldiers, or let's take Israel, or whatever the messianic expectations might have been, at the Last Supper and his believers had in him. But he didn't do that. He actually said the very opposite thing we might expect a really great leader to do, which is to just go, rest in me. I am enough. I find that incredible. I think the fact that he does that transition is really, really remarkable. So as we come into land on my message, I've got a question for you. Which one do you need to grow into the most as a person? If our series is getting back to our vision statement, and our first line of our vision statement is love God, and if we kind of broadly agree there could be many types of loving God, but at least these three are important, which is the one that you would be most exercised about in your heart that you're probably not so great at? Are you somebody that kind of shrinks back a little bit from those peak encounters with God and think, I don't want all that wild and woolly stuff, I'm just normal old me? Well, maybe you're cutting yourself off from something absolutely incredible. I would urge against that. Maybe take some risks on God and allow him to take you to a special place. Or are you one of these people that's kind of like, hey, I do my day, and if I remember Jesus, he's lucky. Or I'll do my day and I'm so driven, and then I kind of get to the end and I say a little tiny prayer at the end. And hey, we've all done that. But is there scope for us to kind of include him more intentionally? Could we do that a little better? And I would argue perhaps that's where most of us might be at. And that's the encouragement I would bring. Are we somebody that finds those tough decisions that the Lord asks us to make sometimes just so difficult? How do we navigate those? Well, I guess my counsel would be learn how to abide continually. Practice that as a spiritual discipline. It's beautiful and wonderful and very life replenishing. Be open to number one, open to the mountaintop experiences, because you never know when they're going to come. I hardly think that Peter, James and John prayed for the transfiguration to happen that day, did they? But it happened nevertheless. But be open to that. Go up the mountain with Jesus. Because the rest of the disciples stayed behind, didn't they? They didn't have that encounter. I wonder if they felt fed up about that when they came back. Be open to it. And then I would say with number 3, if you're facing something really tough where you feel God's asking you to do something righteous and it's really, really difficult, maybe ask for some help with that. Get your church family around you praying about it. Open it out a bit more. Once in a while we get things you can't open out, I get that, but most of the time, Let's be vulnerable enough to open out and say, hey, I'm really struggling with this. Would you pray for me? It makes it so, so much better. And people look out for you. That's what church was invented for. I'm going to ask the worship team just to return. Love God, reach people, make disciples. And I think love God has 3 parts. Mountaintop, day to day, hard cost. And you might think of some more too. Shall we pray? And then we'll worship a bit more.